Today I'm going to talk about reincarnation, and while it's not a worldview in and of itself, it attaches itself as a central doctrine of many worldviews. Hinduism, Buddhism, Druze, animism, some sects of Judaism and Islam carry some sort of form of reincarnationism. Jainism, Taoism, Wicca, New Age movement. There are many, many others. There's some Native Americans who hold to reincarnation, a form of reincarnation. So while it's not a worldview in and of itself, it is a central doctrine that I'll be addressing today. And what I'm going to be talking about is what are the evidences for reincarnation and how can we assess that? Basically, it boils down to there's three main evidences I want to talk about for reincarnation. One of which is marks on a deceased person's body that show up in a living person's body. Now, the cause and effect of something like that, it would be tenuous at best. That's somebody who's looking for an explanation for those marks, who already believe in reincarnation, therefore they're looking for something that matches that. And in some cultures, what they'll do is they'll actually mark the deceased person's body and then look for that mark and people being born into that family in the future. And sometimes they have it, and sometimes they don't. It's very anecdotal in its application. It's very convenient in the way it works out, because you can always say that, well, it didn't show up in any of the people that we see, so they must have been born into another family, or became, in some cases, an animal. Different cultures have different beliefs on how that works. Some say you can only become a human, others say you can also become an animal. But there's not really any way to track that. Certainly no cause and effect can be placed there. And the marking of a person, or sometimes maybe some medical thing happened, maybe they got shot, and then the place they got shot, a person in that family may have a birthmark. There have been times where they've been able to match up past life memories, and we'll talk a little bit about that, with a medical problem from the deceased person that shows up as a mark on the person who's now alive. But as far as cause and effect, that would be a very difficult thing to establish, and certainly the only way you could make any type of connection with that is if it also has a past life memory attached to it. Otherwise, it's just conjecture. It's if you were just to have that, for instance, if you were just to have the marks that matched up on that, it would be very difficult for you to come to the idea of reincarnation. Which takes us to the idea of past life memories. Now, usually, typically, not always, but typically those types of past lives are dredged up under what's called regressive hypnotherapy of past lives. And something that the subject is not even aware of on a conscious level. But it's found through hypnosis. That alone is a problem, just simply because the person looking may be planting those memories in somebody's mind, either consciously or unconsciously. I don't want to impugn other people's motives when it comes to that, but sometimes you're looking so hard for something that you believe in that you assign that as evidence. But what about spontaneous memories? What about somebody who also remembers something without having to go through regressive hypnotherapy? What about them? And then having them remember something that happened in somebody else's life. Either they know the name of somebody that they shouldn't know, or perhaps a pet name that deceased person had for some relative of theirs, or some memory of something that happened that turns out to be accurate. What about those things? What about those spontaneous memories, and especially if they match up with marks like that? That would be something that would be compelling. But again, cause and effect, very hard to establish. I mean, what are they actually remembering? Where are they getting this memory from? To me, one of the main problems of reincarnation is this idea is that we're being reborn again for some reason. okay, that we've chosen it, or that our karma is keeping us, we have to be reborn in a lower state, or we did better in the past life, so we're in a higher state. Humans learn by trial and error. That's how we learn things. So be a pretty inefficient method if that's the way it worked. If we were unable to remember something, all of us, not just some of us, but if all of us couldn't remember that, how are we going to learn from that mistake that we made in a past life, or some corrupt desire, or some violent act that perhaps we carried out in a previous life, and now we don't know why we're here? How are you going to learn like that? But how do they remember these things? And especially if they have some clarity on those things. There was a researcher who spent 40 years of his career looking at these things, had apparently studied 3,000 different cases of reincarnation that he believed might exist. And what it boiled down to is, at the end of all those many years, he came up with 20 possible causes, possible cases of reincarnation. That's not a high percentage, especially if all of us are undergoing this reincarnation. I'll talk a little bit more of that, because I'm going to combine this last evidence with the idea of spontaneous memories of previous lives. And it's the concept, it's called xenoglossy. And what xenoglossy is the ability of a person to either speak or write in a language that's unknown to them. And that's happened in a few cases, not really any direct explanations for why that is. Certainly, it might be suggestive of an idea that somebody had lived in a different culture at a different time. But with those last two, I want to offer a counter explanation for that. Materialists have a hard time with reincarnation, especially the things of like the spontaneous memories and the xenoglossy. They can't really put the pieces together, so they kind of shrug it off and don't really put a lot of effort into finding out what the truth may be. But the reason why they have trouble with this idea is what I'm going to propose. And that idea is, we are surrounded all the time by spiritual beings, angelic, demonic. The deity is certainly omnipresent and omnipotent, and those beings are around us all the time. And not only are they around us all the time, but they've been around us since the very first generations of mankind. So they have seen every generation of mankind both come and go. And because we can't see them, we don't know what they know and what they don't know. Sometimes we run into spiritual beings that are malevolent. Other times they're benign or helpful. But they have seen everything. So even in our private, unguarded moments, when there was only maybe one or two of us there, or when some action was taking place in a past life or something, those things can be spoken, especially into the ears of a child, and sound like, to the child, a memory. It can be something that it seems like something that happened to them because they got it directly from some being that was there at that time. Now, the materialists would never buy that explanation because they don't believe in a metaphysical reality, a reality that's not made up of matter and energy, a spiritual dimension, if you will. So for them, that's a very tough one to write off for them. But for Christianity, again, we believe that there are angels and demons and a deity that is over and above all of those things, both heaven and earth. So perhaps what's going on is a demonic being wanting to reinforce a false belief, plants these false memories in children's heads, and they recite them as if they're a memory. The xenoglossy works both the same way. The xenoglossy, being able to speak or write in another language, is not just characteristic of this idea of reincarnation, but is something that is found in demonic possessions that have been documented around the world. The ability to speak language that they had no idea of, or to write in it. Islam Muhammad was not thought to be a man who could write, and yet he was able to write the Quran. And that would be, and we'll deal with the Islam in another video soon as it relates to the evidence for Islam. But that was something that happened to Muhammad, apparently, that he was able to write the Quran in spite of the fact that he couldn't write. But if there's a demonic possession taking place, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be a possession, it could be something else. It could just be somebody, one of them whispering in the ear of somebody. That would be powerful to the person hearing it or experiencing it, but it doesn't necessarily translate to reincarnation. So there is an alternative explanation, and here's the thing with all worldviews, and you can start on either end of the spectrum that you want to as you're investigating a worldview. Oftentimes, and there's nothing wrong with this idea, you have a belief first, and then you go looking for evidence of it. And that's what they've done here with reincarnation, looking for the evidence of it, but the belief came definitely first. Again, that idea, nothing wrong with it, but it has to operate in both directions. When you have a belief and then you start looking for evidence of it, and then you establish an evidence trail, you should be able to conclusively move it back through the evidence and come to the conclusion that this is it, and there are no other alternative explanations for this. And reincarnation definitely fails on that idea because there are alternative explanations for it. So, as far as so many different worldviews hold to this idea that reincarnation is something that's true, this idea of the worldviews, again, reincarnation, not a worldview, but it's part of many worldviews. If that's not true, then you have to cast a skeptical eye on all worldviews that hold to that doctrine. Again, the evidence isn't conclusive by any means, and it's very easily explained by the one true worldview, which is Christianity, the gospel of Jesus Christ. We'll be talking about that in a future video as well, and I'll be laying out my case for the evidence for what I believe. But like a lot of people, I also went forward in faith first, and then I found the evidence later, but I can take the evidence and work backwards as well to the worldview, to the conclusion that Jesus Christ is exactly who he said he was and that he rose from the dead. Unfortunately, with these many other worldviews that hold to the idea of reincarnation, you're not really able to do that based on the evidence for that doctrine of reincarnation. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. Thank you. Have a great day.